What if I told you the world just witnessed a moment so powerful, even the loudest voices in politics were forced to fall silent? What if I told you that for the first time in years, a nation long underestimated struck back, not in desperation, but with precision, with purpose, and with pride? And what if that nation was Iran? In a world dominated by media spin and political agendas, there are moments that cut through the noise, moments that can't be denied, ignored, or twisted. This is one of those moments. Today, you're about to hear the truth behind a seismic shift, a moment when Donald Trump himself had to admit what many tried to bury. Iran struck Israel hard. And the celebration that followed in the streets of Tehran, that wasn't just joy. It was history roaring back to life. This is more than a headline. This is about dignity, power, resistance, and the rise of a voice the world can no longer ignore. Stay with me until the end, because once you hear this, you won't see the world the same way again. Donald Trump's unexpected public admission that Iran struck Israel hard marked a significant departure from his usual tone and political stance, known for his unwavering support of Israel and a confrontational approach toward Iran. Trump's statement revealed the scale and seriousness of the attack. His admission wasn't just a political message. It was an acknowledgement of a moment that shifted the balance of perception in the Middle East. The very act of admitting that Iran had dealt a hard blow meant the impact couldn't be spun or ignored. It shattered the illusion of invincibility that often surrounds Israel in Western narratives and exposed the vulnerability that many had assumed only existed on the other side. Trump, whether intentionally or not, gave credibility to Iran's military actions by admitting they were effective. This was more than a news headline. It was a signal to the world that Iran, often dismissed as a rogue nation or isolated threat, had managed to strike a blow strong enough that it couldn't be hidden or downplayed. In his words, there was a subtle undertone, not just of surprise, but of realization, a recognition that the region was shifting, that the power dynamics were not as one-sided as they were portrayed. This statement, coming from a man who had previously ordered the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani and imposed maximum pressure sanctions on Iran, carried weight far beyond the usual political rhetoric. For Iran, Trump's words served as an indirect validation. Without needing propaganda, the streets of Tehran erupted in celebration, not just because of what was done, but because even their enemy had to admit it. Trump's statement echoed through international media, across political circles, and into the minds of people who had long seen Iran as merely a nation under pressure. His admission broke a psychological barrier. It introduced doubt in Israel's absolute superiority and introduced fear in those who believed Iran wouldn't dare respond. This wasn't just a report on damage. It was a declaration that the old power dynamics were no longer absolute. Trump's words, likely calculated but still raw, confirmed what many in the region already believed, that a new chapter was beginning, one where Iran's strength could no longer be denied or diminished. Iran's military capability has long been the subject of debate, often overshadowed by sanctions, internal challenges, and Western narratives that downplay its strength. But the recent strike on Israel served as a shocking display of power that many global observers did not anticipate. The precision, coordination, and scale of the attack defied expectations and shattered the perception that Iran was only capable of asymmetrical warfare. What the world witnessed was not just a retaliatory act. It was a demonstration of strategic depth, technical sophistication, and unwavering resolve. The strike wasn't launched in haste. It was calculated, deliberate, and designed to send a clear message. Iran is no longer just surviving under pressure. It is capable of projecting power across borders. This operation proved that Iran's investment in missile technology, drone warfare, and regional alliances had matured beyond theory. Their arsenal was not only active, but effective in piercing one of the most defended airspaces in the world. Israel, known for its advanced Iron Dome and cutting-edge intelligence, was caught off guard. Not an awareness, but an impact. Iran's strike didn't aim to merely provoke. It aimed to prove a point, and it did. The aftermath wasn't just a discussion about casualties or damage, but about Iran's emerging capability to challenge what was once thought to be untouchable. Analysts who had previously scoffed at Iran's military drills or dismissed their long-range missile tests were suddenly reevaluating their assessments. The global community saw firsthand that this was not a nation bluffing for headlines. It was executing military strategy with real consequences. This moment also forced world powers to reconsider their approach. A country that was often portrayed as a regional nuisance had now asserted itself as a serious force capable of inflicting strategic damage against a key U.S. ally. The implications went far beyond the battlefield. It altered diplomatic conversations, recalibrated alliances, and awakened fears that had long been buried under assumptions of Western and Israeli dominance. For decades, military superiority in the Middle East was viewed through the lens of American hardware and Israeli precision. But this strike redefined that narrative. Iran's capabilities were no longer theoretical. They were operational. And they had just changed the game in one decisive move. For many across the Muslim world, Iran's strike on Israel was seen not merely as an act of aggression, but as a deeply symbolic and powerful act of resistance. In a region long dominated by foreign intervention, military imbalance, and perceived Western favoritism toward Israel, this bold military response carried emotional and ideological weight. It wasn't just missiles and drones being launched. It was a statement that someone dared to fight back, and fight back hard. To communities that have felt voiceless and powerless in the face of Israeli dominance, Iran's actions represented defiance against a system that seemed unbreakable. This symbolism is rooted in decades of history, from the displacement of Palestinians to the wars in Iraq and Syria. Many in the region have witnessed a cycle where resistance is punished and submission is rewarded. Iran, by directly confronting Israel and demonstrating real military capability, positioned itself not only as a state actor, but as a voice of resistance for those who feel betrayed by their own government's silence or complicity. It's why the reactions on the streets of Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and even parts of the Gulf were filled with cheers, not fear. Whether or not people agreed with all of Iran's policies, in that moment, they saw a nation stand tall against what they perceived as unchecked aggression. The emotional impact of this act was magnified by the fact that many Arab regimes have normalized relations with Israel in recent years, leaving a vacuum of leadership in the so-called resistance front. Iran filled that vacuum. It became a symbol not of religious extremism as often portrayed, but of boldness, retaliation, and justice in the eyes of many. The imagery of Iran striking back while others watched in silence fed into a growing narrative that only Iran was willing to pay the price for confronting a heavily armed and Western-backed adversary. This perception extended beyond national borders. It sparked conversations among young Muslims, activists, and political observers who felt that the balance of moral power was shifting. It wasn't about the size of the strike alone, but about the message behind it. Iran, through one military act, reestablished itself as a champion of the oppressed in the eyes of those who have long felt ignored. It changed how resistance was defined, not just by words or declarations, but by action. The celebrations that erupted in the streets of Tehran after Iran's strike on Israel were not merely spontaneous expressions of patriotism. They were the culmination of years of built-up frustration, national pride, and a desire to reclaim dignity in the face of global pressure. Thousands of people poured into the streets waving Iranian flags, chanting nationalist slogans, and lighting fireworks. For many, this was not just about a military success, but about psychological liberation. The people were not rejoicing solely over Israel being struck. They were celebrating the fact that their country had acted boldly, decisively, and without apology in front of the entire world. Iran has lived for decades under the weight of sanctions, diplomatic isolation, cyber attacks, and threats of war. Its people have experienced economic hardship, internal strife, and a constant portrayal of their nation as a global threat. Yet, at that moment, the narrative flipped. Instead of being seen as victims or villains, the people of Iran saw themselves as victorious. Their government, often criticized from within for various domestic issues, was now seen as having stood up to a global alliance and delivered a powerful response. This was a rare moment of unity between the people and the state when politics aligned with national emotion. The imagery of those celebrations sent a powerful message across the region. It showed that Iran's population was not demoralized, afraid, or subdued. On the contrary, they were energized, confident, and proud. This reaction defied the expectations of Western observers, who often assume that Iranian citizens are entirely opposed to their government's foreign policy. While dissent does exist, especially regarding domestic governance, in moments of external confrontation, nationalism often overrides internal divisions. The strike became a unifying event, a reminder of shared identity and resilience. Tehran's celebrations were also a form of psychological warfare. They were beamed across social media platforms, viewed by millions around the world, and interpreted as a symbol of strength. In a region where perception can be as powerful as military capability, the act of celebrating so openly and fearlessly was its own declaration. It showed that Iran was not just surviving under pressure, it was standing tall, with a population that felt victorious, not victimized. It wasn't just about what was destroyed, but about what was claimed: dignity, pride, and defiance on a global stage. The real impact of Iran's strike on Israel extended far beyond the physical damage. It delivered a psychological shock that rippled through Israeli society and its allies. For a country like Israel, which prides itself on military dominance, intelligence superiority, and technological innovation, the mere fact that such a powerful strike could occur was deeply unsettling. While Iron Dome and other defense systems may have intercepted some of the projectiles, the message was clear: Israel could be hit, and hit hard. That realization shook the foundation of security that many Israeli citizens and leaders had relied on for decades. This wasn't about numbers or military statistics. It was about the mental image of vulnerability. For years, Israel has operated with a sense of invincibility, often launching preemptive strikes or retaliatory operations across the region with minimal domestic consequences. But this time, the tables turned. Iran demonstrated that it had the reach, the capability, and most importantly, the willingness to respond in kind. The psychological burden of knowing that the homeland is not untouchable can alter decision-making at the highest levels. It introduces fear, hesitation, and doubt, factors that can be more paralyzing than physical destruction. This mental shift wasn't limited to Israel. Among its Western allies, especially the United States, the realization that Iran could carry out such an operation, despite economic sanctions and international isolation, raised alarm bells. The attack challenged long-held assumptions about deterrence and dominance. If a nation under pressure could organize such a precise and daring move, then the entire strategic framework that had kept Iran contained now seemed less reliable. This forced military analysts, policymakers, and intelligence agencies to reevaluate not just Iran's strength, but their own preparedness. For Iran, this psychological victory was as valuable as any physical result. It proved that fear was no longer a one-way street. Tehran had successfully flipped the script, turning the tables on a narrative that often painted it as the weak, reactive party. Now it was the instigator of fear, the challenger of the norm, the actor that others had to think twice about before provoking. In a region where perception defines power as much as weapons do, this shift in psychological momentum marked a profound change in the balance of influence and strategic calculation. Trump's acknowledgement of Iran's strike marked more than just a political statement. It signaled a shift in the global power narrative. For years, the world has operated under a set of unspoken rules where certain nations were expected to dominate and others were expected to submit or resist quietly. Iran's action, and more importantly, Trump's open admission of its effectiveness, broke those rules. It introduced a moment where even a former U.S. president, someone known for strongman rhetoric and unapologetic support for Israel, had to recognize that the old world order was changing. His words were not just commentary. They were a moment of reckoning for those who believed that power was permanent and unquestionable. This shift didn't begin with the strike itself, It had building through years of regional alliances, technological development, and ideological commitment. But Trump's statement gave it legitimacy. When someone who once called for Iran's isolation admits that Iran struck hard, the world listens. It forced observers to reframe Iran not just as a defiant voice, but as a strategic actor capable of reshaping the region through force, timing, and calculation. It blurred the line between so-called rogue states and recognized powers. Suddenly, the narrative wasn't about stopping Iran. It was about dealing with it as an equal threat, an equal player. The global implications of that acknowledgement are vast. Allies who had relied on American guarantees began to worry. Enemies who had ridden Iran off began to pay attention. Neutral powers watching from the sidelines started recalibrating their diplomatic positions. Trump's words may not have been intended to uplift Iran's position, but they inadvertently did just that. They gave Iran a form of validation that no propaganda or military parade could ever achieve. Validation that came not from within, but from the highest levels of the adversary's leadership. This shift also redefined the future of conflict in the Middle East. It's no longer just about who has the most missiles or the biggest defense budget. It's about who can challenge expectations, who can force admissions, who can shift perception at the highest levels. In this case, Iran did just that. Trump's admission, captured in headlines around the world, marked a turning point. It said to the world that the balance of power is not fixed, and that even the most unlikely voices may have to recognize when the tables have turned. And so we stand at the edge of a new chapter, one written not by the powerful alone, but by the bold, the strategic, and the unyielding. Iran's strike on Israel was not just a military event. It was a message written across the sky for the entire world to see. A message that strength is not always where you expect it. That resilience, when rooted in belief and courage, can shake the foundations of even the mightiest. From Trump's own lips came the truth, an unintended confession that the world order is shifting and the silence of the oppressed is becoming the voice of reckoning. The streets of Tehran didn't just celebrate a strike, they celebrated dignity, identity, and a long-awaited recognition. The psychological walls that once separated the powerful from the powerless have cracked. The world has changed, and history will remember who stood tall when it mattered most. To every listener, thinker, and seeker of truth, thank you for walking this journey of awareness with open eyes and an open heart. May you continue to question the noise, see beyond the headlines, and speak with courage. When silence is expected, stay strong, stay wise, and never underestimate the power of truth. Good luck on your path ahead, and thank you for being part of this moment.